Hi, my name's Phil. I like to crack politics, and this video I'd like to discuss the latest scandal regarding Cambridge Analytica, which is the group largely responsible for conning the US and UK public into voting for Trump and Brexit respectively. This time it's how they targeted predominantly black voters to stop them voting at all, and wonder if something similar might have been at play in the UK. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, one of the tricks used by Cambridge Analytica, and I suppose similar groups, during the 2016 Brexit referendum and the US presidential election was to steal personal data from Facebook and categorise potential voters. Now, their main targets were revealed to be those whose political opinions were malleable. You know, they would target these people with a deluge of inflammatory advertisements posing as information videos. They would also pose as being from lots of different groups, often disguised to look like they were academic research groups to give it a sense of intellectual credibility. Now, for someone whose opinions are vulnerable to such influence, the idea that you were getting this consistent message, apparently from so many different groups across different parts of the political spectrum, made it appear that it must have been true. Well, everyone agrees it must be true. After all, why would so many groups with so many different political opinions all agree on these things if they weren't universal truths? Of course, the messages being pushed in the UK and the US were subtly different, but they still essentially preyed on the them and us premise. They were divisive, very often racist, and very, very effective. And the system used by Cambridge Analytica and similar groups, including the group led by Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove for their Vote Leave campaign, was, very sophisticated. It was extremely accurate at picking just the right people to target in order to most efficiently use their resources. In the United States, where the presidential election works on a first-past-the-post system of electoral colleges, very similar to the parliamentary elections in the UK, it was also able to target people where it would do the most good, drilling right down to the relatively small number of regions where a few extra votes would tip the result. But now there's been another expose on Channel 4 News in this country, specifically related to the 2016 US presidential election. But you do have to wonder if maybe something like this was done in the UK as well, because the same groups who targeted those malleable voters with their misleading messaging to get them to vote a particular way also targeted others as well. So it's been reported that they targeted 3.5 million African Americans in key states. Now, this was not so much to try and persuade them to vote for Trump, but just to stay home altogether. Just don't even vote. Don't bother. They bombarded them with false advertisements denigrating Hillary Clinton. The feeling was that you don't just have to target voters who might be persuaded to vote for your cause, but you can also push voter apathy onto those who won't be for turning. They'll never support your guy, but they might be persuaded just not to support anyone. And that works too. That's helpful too. Now, the campaign focused on 16 states, which of course gives you an idea of just how little of the country really matters in such a vital matter of national importance. The report also noted that several of these swing states went very narrowly to Trump in 2016 after a collapse of the black vote. In other words, Trump won because a significant number of black American voters that traditionally would have voted, we're not talking about ones who would consistently not vote, normally would vote, did not vote in this election. The leaked records of 198 million Americans that was passed on to Channel 4 News were given, it had a category for a lot of these voters named deterrence. In other words, the system should deter these people from voting at all. And the records marked deterrence were disproportionately of black American citizens. Now, a number of the adverts targeting them were claiming that they were pushing the idea that Hillary Clinton had no sympathy for African Americans. They were essentially not even trying to bother saying that Trump would be on their side, because that concept would be laughable to most of them. Even with very sophisticated propaganda, you ain't going to persuade them of that. But they obviously did succeed in at least saying but you don't have a champion in Clinton either. You're not represented, don't even bother voting. And it pointed out that, you know, this report, that is not the propaganda, pointed out that Donald Trump won Michigan, for example, by 10,000 votes. And in that state, 15% of voters are black. But the Cambridge Analytica records had 33% of their Michigan deterrence records as black, meaning there was a disproportionate number of black voters labelled as deterrents. In other words, target these with the anti-Clinton adverts. And as shocking as this story has been, over here in the UK, we look at this and we go, I've got a question. Because did these groups who've been using these techniques, and we know that they were using exactly the same groups, using exactly the same techniques to push Brexit, they've done something similar in this country. After all, why wouldn't they? Yes, the Brexit referendum in itself was not based on first past the post. That was actually just an overall, you know, which side got the most votes. But the concept of changing people's voting behaviour still stands. The Cambridge Analytica system identified those voters whose minds could be changed. Now, if you seemed very set in your views, it didn't really bother you. This is what we already knew with Cambridge Analytica, when the scandal that broke that eventually finished them off. It didn't bother with people who were fixed in their views. It focused on the ones who looked like they could change. No point in wasting resources. This was all about efficiently targeting where it could be done. But until this particular story broke this week, certainly my understanding was that it focused on those who could be switched from one side to another. But here we have the system also identifying people who would not switch their vote, or not in large enough numbers to be worthwhile, but might be persuaded not to engage in the democratic process at all. And if those people, if they do go to the polls, would vote for your opposition, well, actually getting them to stay at home is a win. And it's also worth remembering that we haven't in the UK just had a Brexit referendum. We've had a couple of general elections since then as well. And those general elections were fought over this issue. And therefore, we also know that these same groups were also interested in the results of those general elections. And those elections are based on first past the post, where targeting a relatively small number of voters in a limited number of constituencies, just like in America, can massively swing the balance of power in Parliament. We have 650 MPs in the UK, at least until Boris Johnson takes his hatchets to the boundaries. But the main parties typically target no more than 100 of them, often significantly fewer. I think Labour targeted about 80 at the last general election, because it takes too many resources to do a proper job of it. Yes, you have your national campaign, but you have to target your seats and you need a lot of resources into them to make a difference. And there's no point in trying to spread yourself too thin, then it's like you're not going to target any. So the resources allow you to maybe target 100 at a push. And this is one of the reasons why we can't get too carried away about Labour's prospects in 2024. Yes, it's all looking very good at the moment and a long way to go. But it's all very well getting ahead in the polls, but the swing needed to get a solid majority in 2024 is greater than has ever been achieved in British history. And that's because it requires a swing of way more seats than you can effectively target with the resources available. But anyway, it's the part about targeting voters to deter them from voting that caught my imagination. Now, I know how this could look. I'm going to say something here. And I know some people will go, oh my God, yeah, they absolutely did that. And if you've got no serious background in statistics, you could absolutely think that this is serious evidence here. It's not. This is a thought. This is a hypothesis. This leaked information from America doesn't prove anything. Doesn't give a serious indication that the same thing was used in the UK. It's a point of interest, but it is a significant point of interest. So, in the 2017 general election, the Conservatives did not win a majority of seats. Theresa May, the Conservatives, won more seats than any other party, and she was able to form a minority government propped up by the DUP. In 2019, Boris Johnson's Conservatives did win a majority, and it was a big one. Big one. So, Boris Johnson and the Conservatives got way more votes than Theresa May then? No. The Conservatives gained about 2.2% more votes in 2019 than they did in 2017. It's an increase, but it's a small increase. It certainly doesn't take you from, oh, we're about 10 MPs under to, oh, we're 80 MPs over. Or 80 majority. It wasn't quite that. Now, Labour, on the other hand, recorded 20.1% fewer votes in 2019 compared to 2017. So the net result for Labour's votes was 1 in 5 people who voted Labour in 2017 didn't vote for Labour in 2019. And that's the net result. Obviously, it'll be a greater number than that because some will have switched their votes. Now, that was the difference with the election. It wasn't the Conservative votes won. And it wasn't even a switch of support from Labour to the Conservatives, which some commentators keep banging on about. That was not the significant impact. What mattered were the people who used to go out and vote, would normally go out and vote Labour, and didn't in 2019. Now, like I said, don't get carried away. Sure, there's maybe a parallel here with the US. The Conservatives, it has to be borne in mind, also had opponents in the SNP and the Liberal Democrats in some constituencies. So if they were targeting Labour in this way, they would have targeted those maybe. And both of those parties actually increased the number of votes gained handsomely. They got a big swing towards them in terms of votes. The SNP also in terms of seats, Liberal Democrats, not so much. But it could be argued that given that such a system, again, like I said, targets a relatively small number of key constituencies, that such a system may actually not have targeted the SNP and Liberal Democrats and may have targeted traditional Labour strongholds exclusively. Does make you wonder. It does make you wonder. Now, I will just add for those who may look at this and see it as some justification of Corbyn, no, that is not the takeaway from this. Quite the opposite, in fact. The exact opposite. Because whether a system like this was used to deter voters in 2019 or not, and it may well have been, and there's a distinct possibility that there was, because if the facility existed and the Conservatives and their campaign managers knew about it, if they knew about these techniques, why wouldn't they? Doesn't absolve Labour of blame even if it was, because yes, Corbyn was targeted. Yes, a lot of it was unfair, but Labour also bear the responsibility for allowing such a weak champion to represent us in exactly the same way that the Democrats were responsible for promoting Hillary Clinton, who was a weak target for the same measures. The take home from this is if you are going to be facing techniques like this, abhorrent techniques like this, and there's nothing you can do to stop them until you're in power, you can't outlaw them in opposition, then what you do is you don't cry about it in a corner, because that's not how you win power. You pick a leader who can offer the strongest possible defence against it. The one who is least weak against these techniques. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.